The sound of my sneakers squeaked against the polished Italian marble of the skyline atrium. I wasn't there for the black tie gala. I was there for an execution, but before I could reach the platinum elevators, a tuxedo blocked my path. Ryan, my ex-husband, looked me up and down with a sneer that used to make me feel small. Not today. Jessica? Good God, he laughed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Did you actually come here to beg for a job? Look at you. Beside him, clinging to his arm like a trophy, Chloe inspected her fresh manicure, looking bored. Babe, tell her. Poor girls aren't allowed in the VIP wing. Before we see who really owns this building, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from right now. I want to see which city has the strongest community representing tonight. 3 years ago, seeing Ryan in a custom tuxedo with a woman half my age on his arm would have shattered me. I would have stammered, apologized for my existence, and retreated to the service entrance like a frightened animal. But that version of Jessica was dead. I had liquidated that version of myself months ago because she was a liability. I looked at Chloe. She was wearing a sequin dress that probably cost $3,000, sneering at me like I was the dirt on her heel. I stayed silent. Explanations are for people who need permission to exist in a space. I didn't need permission to walk into a building I owned. I stepped around them. Ryan reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder like he was shooing away a stray dog. Jessica. Stop, he hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Seriously. The service entrance is around back next to the loading dock. Don't make a scene here. Security is tight tonight because of the merger meeting. You're going to get yourself arrested. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. He was worried about security. He should have been worried about his severance package. I kept walking, moving past the velvet ropes where the regular guests Ryan and Chloe included were waiting in a long, snake-like line to have their identifications checked by the front desk staff. I headed straight for the far right lane, the lane with no ropes, the lane with no guard, the platinum turnstile. Hey! Ryan's voice pitched up, panicked and authoritative. You can't go through there. That's for board members and C-suite executives only. You're going to set off the alarm. I could hear the smirk in his voice turn into genuine annoyance. He really thought he was doing me a favor. He thought he was saving me from the embarrassment of being rejected by a machine. He wanted to be the hero who corrected the silly, confused poor girl before the big bad security guards tackled her. I stopped in front of the scanner. The glass barrier was waist-high, etched with the company logo, a logo my grandfather had sketched on a napkin 50 years ago. Fumbling for a visitor badge wasn't necessary. Searching for a keycard was for employees. I simply raised my right hand and pressed my palm flat against the cool, black glass of the biometric scanner. Ryan snorted behind me. It's not going to work, Jessica. God, you are so desperate. It's embarrassing. A soft, musical chime rang out. It wasn't a buzzer. It was a welcome tone. A strip of LED lights along the floor turned from a dormant red to a brilliant, inviting green. On the small display screen, 5 words flashed in crisp white text. Welcome home, Director Sterling. The glass barriers slid open silently, disappearing into the floor. I stepped through. What? Ryan's voice cracked. Hey, guard, excuse me. She just snuck in. The machine malfunctioned. He was waving frantically at the head of security, a man named Marcus who had known me since I was 12 years old. Marcus just looked at Ryan, then looked at me, and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't move a muscle to stop me. I turned around slowly. I was now on the other side of the glass. The separation was symbolic, but it felt physical. They were out there. In the noise, in the waiting line, in the cheap seats. I was in the sanctuary. Ryan was red in the face, pointing at the open gate, sputtering to Chloe that it must be a glitch, that I probably got lucky, that the system was broken. Chloe looked confused, her eyes darting from my comfortable sneakers to the open executive gate, trying to calculate the math of a situation that didn't add up. I pressed the call button for the private penthouse elevator. It arrived instantly, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside the mahogany-paneled car and turned to face them one last time as the heavy steel doors began to slide shut. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched as Ryan's furious, confused face disappeared from view, blocked out by the closing walls of my empire. He thought I had broken the rules. He didn't realize I had written them. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent to the 52nd floor. As the numbers on the display climbed, so did the memories I had suppressed for 3 years. I knew what people would say. I knew what Ryan would scream when the truth finally hit him. Why did I lie? Why did I pretend to be a struggling administrative assistant when I had a trust fund that could buy a small country? It wasn't a lie. It was a mercy. Ryan was a man who needed to feel tall, which meant I had to spend our entire marriage on my knees. I didn't hide my wealth to trick him. I hid it because I knew the fragility of his ego. I knew that a man like Ryan couldn't love a woman who was more powerful than him. He needed a cheerleader, not a chairman. I leaned back against the mahogany rail, closing my eyes. I could still smell the stale coffee from 3 years ago. I remembered the night he came home in tears, slamming his laptop shut, terrified of a presentation for the regional sales director. He was going to fail. He was going to be fired. I sat up with him until 4 in the morning. I didn't just audit his work. I restructured the entire asset. I reorganized his data, fixed his financial models, and simplified the strategy. When he presented it the next day, he got a standing ovation. He came home beaming, telling me how he had crushed it, how he was a natural-born leader. I just smiled and poured the wine. I let him believe it. I was the silent investor in the startup of his self-esteem. It wasn't just the work, it was everything. That brand new luxury sedan he drove to the gala tonight? He thought he qualified for the loan on his own merit. He didn't know I had wired $20,000 to the dealership as anonymous down payment incentive just so he could drive off the lot feeling like a king. The promotion he got last year, he thought his boss finally recognized his talent. He didn't know I had called my father and asked him to intervene, to give Ryan a win because our marriage was crumbling under the weight of his insecurity. I had built a pedestal for him out of my own silence. I stood in the shadows so he could shine in the light. But looking at my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors, I realized the mistake wasn't his. It was mine. I had treated him like a project, not a partner. I had invested emotional capital into a liability that was never going to yield a return. I had tried to buy his love with my competence, disguising it as his own. The elevator slowed. The smooth deceleration pulled me back to the present. Ryan thought he was the provider. He thought he was the prize. He had no idea that for 3 years, he hadn't been the captain of the ship. He had been a passenger on a vessel I built, fueled, and steered. And tonight, I wasn't just kicking him off the boat. I was scuttling the whole fleet. The doors opened with a decisive chime. The hallway to the boardroom stretched out before me, lined with portraits of my ancestors. I straightened my blazer. The invisible pedestal was gone. It was time for gravity to do its job. The boardroom antechamber was designed to intimidate. It was a space of floor-to-ceiling glass and chrome, floating 40 stories above the city, intended to make visitors feel small before they even sat down at the negotiating table. But when I walked in, Ryan didn't look intimidated. He looked like he owned the place, or rather, like a child pretending to own the place because he had put on his father's suit. He was pacing by the window, rehearsing his opening lines to Chloe, who was busy taking a selfie with the skyline. When the door clicked shut behind me, Ryan spun around. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but then his expression settled into a look of smug realization. "Oh," he laughed, checking his watch. "They let you in to clean up? Good. Grab me a sparkling water, with lime, and make sure it's cold." He turned his back on me instantly, dismissing me as part of the furniture. He assumed I had used the service entrance, that I had begged for a temp shift to scrape by. He couldn't conceive of a reality where I existed on the same plane as him. To Ryan, I was, and always would be, the help. I didn't move toward the wet bar. I stood perfectly still near the mahogany doors of the inner sanctum, watching him perform. "Babe," Listen to this, Ryan said, gesturing wildly to Chloe, though his voice was loud enough for me to hear. He wanted an audience. This deal today? It's huge. We're looking at a complete vertical synergy of the paradigm. It's hostile, technically, but we're pivoting to a friendly takeover via asset liquidity. I almost laughed out loud. It was painful to watch. He was stringing together buzzwords he had probably heard on a podcast that morning, confident that if he said them with enough authority, they would mean something. It was the Dunning-Kruger effect in a tuxedo. He was too incompetent to realize just how incompetent he was. He was talking about vertical synergy for a horizontal acquisition. He was talking about asset liquidity for a debt-heavy absorption. He didn't understand the business. He just liked the sound of his own voice echoing in a high-tax bracket. Chloe giggled, looking at him with wide, vacant eyes. You're so smart, Ryan. I don't get any of that business stuff. Don't worry, Ryan said, shooting a pitying glance over his shoulder at me. Jessica doesn't get it either. Don't distract her, babe. Admin girls get confused easily. Just let her pour the water. The insult was meant to sting, but it just felt clinical. It was a data point. It confirmed that his arrogance wasn't just a personality flaw, it was a structural defect. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, lecturing the ground on how to fly. I'm not getting you water, Ryan, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger he wanted to provoke. I'll wait for the chairman to start the meeting. Ryan stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. The mask of the successful executive slipped, revealing the bully beneath. Excuse me? He stepped into my personal space, looming over me. You don't wait for anything. You are here because someone took pity on you. Now, you can either do your job and serve the people who actually matter, or you can leave. Now, before I have security drag you out for harassment, do you really want to be humiliated in front of my fiancé? He thought he held the power because he was the loudest thing in the room. He didn't understand that in rooms like this, the most dangerous person is usually the quietest. I'm not the one who's going to be humiliated, Ryan, I said softly. Before he could scream, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. The air in the room shifted instantly. The game of pretend was over. The adults had arrived. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly as the double doors swung open. It wasn't just people entering, it was power. My father, Michael Sterling, walked in first. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a flashy watch. He was in a charcoal suit that cost more than Ryan's entire education, flanked by a phalanx of grim-faced corporate lawyers. Ryan immediately straightened his spine, flashing that salesman smile that I used to mistake for charm. He stepped forward, hand extended, eager to cement his place in the hierarchy. Michael! Sir! So good to see you, Ryan beamed, his voice pitching a little too high. We're ready to sign. The synergy on this deal is going to be incredible. My father didn't break stride. He didn't look at Ryan's extended hand. He didn't even look at Ryan's face. He walked right past him as if he were a potted plant in the hallway, heading straight for the far end of the long mahogany table. The snub was so absolute, so physical, that Ryan was left shaking a hand that grasped nothing but air. Are we ready to proceed? My father asked, his voice gravelly and low. I walked past Ryan, who was still frozen in his rejected greeting. I moved to the opposite end of the table, the seat directly facing the chairman. I pulled out the heavy, high-backed leather chair. Jessica! Ryan hissed, panic finally piercing his arrogance. Get up! What are you doing? That seat is reserved for the chief operations officer. You can't just sit there. I didn't rush. I smoothed my skirt and sat down, crossing my legs. I looked him dead in the eye. I know whose seat this is, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. Sit down. You're making the room look cluttered. Ryan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Beside him, Chloe looked confused, tugging on his sleeve. Babe, why is the poor girl sitting in the big chair? Tell her to move. She's... Ryan stammered, looking from me to my father, waiting for Michael to yell, to call security, to restore the world order he understood. But Michael just opened his folder and uncapped his pen. "Let's correct the terminology before we begin," I said, opening the leather portfolio in front of me. "Ryan, you keep using the word merger. You seem to be under the impression that this is a partnership between equals. It is not." I slid a document across the polished wood. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of him. "This is a distress acquisition," I continued, my tone clinical. "We are buying Chloe's family company to prevent its immediate liquidation. We are acquiring the assets for pennies on the dollar because her father is currently $12 million in debt to us." "That's a lie!" Chloe shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "My daddy is a billionaire. We have houses in Aspen. We have a jet." "You had a jet," I corrected. "It was repossessed this morning." "Which brings me to the matter of your wedding gift." Ryan looked down at the document, his face draining of color as he saw the numbers. "The $500,000 transferred to your account last week?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "You thought that was a dowry. A welcome gift to the family." "It was a gift," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. "It was client money," I said. "Chloe's father emptied the escrow accounts in a last-ditch effort to hide assets before the seizure. By accepting that transfer and moving it into your personal savings, Ryan, you aren't just broke. You are now an accessory to federal wire fraud." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Ryan looked at Chloe, then back at the document. He realized in that second that he hadn't married into royalty. He had married into a crime scene, and I was the prosecutor. Ryan didn't just step away from Chloe, he practically leaped. It was a physical recoil, as if her poverty was a contagious disease he was terrified of catching. The realization that the president's daughter was actually a felon's daughter shattered his entire worldview in a nanosecond. "You lied to me!" Ryan screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe. "You told me the accounts were frozen for an audit. You told me that money was clean. Babe, please." Chloe grabbed his arm, tears streaking her mascara. "My daddy will fix it. We just need to wait. Get off me." Ryan shoved her hand away. The desperation in his eyes was pathetic. He turned back to me, his face morphing instantly, from rage to a pleading, sickening softness. He leaned over the table, trying to catch my eye, trying to conjure intimacy from a relationship he had incinerated years ago. "Jessica, listen," he breathed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. She tricked me. I was a victim here. We can fix this. You and me, Jess. We were always a good team, right? Remember how we used to talk about the future? I can help you run this place. I know the operations. I know the—" "Enough," my father's voice cut through the air like a guillotine blade. Michael Sterling stood up. He didn't slam the table. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood, and the room fell silent. "I am not interested in your domestic squabbles, Ryan. I am interested in the future of this company. Which is why, as of this morning, I have officially filed my retirement papers." Ryan's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, a reflex of ambition. He thought there was a vacuum. He thought there was a chance. "Effective immediately," my father continued, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Jessica is assuming the role of CEO and chairman of the board. She is taking full control of the conglomerate, including the subsidiary you work for, Ryan." Ryan froze. The math hit him. "Which means," I said, closing the portfolio with a final, decisive snap, "that you don't work for Michael anymore. You work for me, and I don't keep liabilities on the payroll. You're fired, Ryan, for cause. For gross incompetence and reputational risk. You can't," Ryan stammered, backing away until he hit the glass wall. "Jessica, please. I gave you the best years of my life. We wanted a family once. I wanted a legacy. You can't just erase me." He was grasping at straws, trying to use our failed fertility struggles, the ones he blamed me for, as a weapon of guilt. He was trying to remind me of the broken woman I used to be. "A legacy," I repeated, standing up slowly. I placed a hand on my stomach. It was a subtle movement, but in the silence of the boardroom, it was screaming. I'm glad you brought that up, Ryan, because I have a legacy. Ryan's eyes dropped to my hand. His mouth fell open. I'm 5 months pregnant, I said. My voice was flat, stripping the emotion out of the room. My husband, the man waiting in the lobby with a coffee, the man who doesn't need me to shrink so he can feel big, is the father. This baby isn't just a child, Ryan. This baby is the heir. This unborn child already has a trust in their name that is worth more than you will earn in 100 lifetimes. The color drained from his face completely. He looked at my stomach, then at the empty chair at the head of the table, realizing the totality of his loss. So, you see, I finished, I didn't just divorce you. I replaced you, biologically, financially, and professionally. You are obsolete. Ryan slumped against the glass, staring at a future that had just evaporated. He had chased a mirage of wealth and status, running away from the very person who held the keys to the kingdom. He hadn't just fumbled the bag, he had fumbled the dynasty. 2 uniformed guards moved in. They didn't ask Ryan to leave. They assisted him. One took his left arm, the other his right. He was screaming, his heels dragging against the carpet, begging me to look at him, to remember the good times that never actually existed. Chloe was shouting that she was going to sue, that this was all a misunderstanding, blaming Ryan for dragging her into this mess. It was a cacophony of desperation. And then, the heavy, soundproof oak doors clicked shut. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. The air conditioning hummed. The city lights twinkled below. The chaos was physically removed from my space. It was over. The tumor had been excised. My father stood at the window, looking out at the skyline he had helped build. He didn't turn around immediately. He gave me a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline settle. When he finally looked at me, there was no pity in his eyes, only respect. You did good, kid, he said quietly. You sure you're okay? I looked at the empty chair where Ryan had sat, sweating and lying just moments ago. I looked at the pitcher of water he had demanded I pour. I felt lighter, as if gravity had suddenly released its hold on me. I'm not just okay, Dad, I said, picking up the heavy fountain pen. I'm free. I looked down at the acquisition contract. The line for the signature was blank. For years, I had signed my name as Ryan's wife. Ryan's supporter, the admin, the helper. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Jessica Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. I capped the pen. I left the folder on the table. I walked out of the boardroom, past the stunned lawyers, and into the private elevator. When the doors opened in the lobby, the noise of the gala was still going. But I didn't care about the party. I walked past the spot where Ryan had blocked me just an hour ago. He was standing near the entrance, away from the cameras. Mark, my husband. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo to impress anyone. He was wearing jeans and a soft sweater, holding 2 paper cups of decaf coffee because he knew I'd be tired. He didn't ask if I won. He didn't ask how much money we made. He just smiled, saw the tension in my shoulders, and handed me the cup. Ready to go home? He asked. Yeah, I said, taking his hand, feeling the warmth of a real partnership. Let's go. Ryan called me poor. Looking back, the appraisal was accurate. I was insolvent in self-respect because I had spent a decade letting a small man define my worth. I had bankrupted my own soul to pay for his ego. But tonight, I finally balanced the ledger. If you've ever had to silence your success just to make someone else feel comfortable, share this story. And hit that follow button, because next time, we don't stay silent.